This is a continuation of Mrs. Roth's General Science Lecture for Module 9, Week 1. This is Part 2. We're continuing our discussion about DNA and its structure, and you have already completed Experiment 9.1. In that experiment, you learned that each side of the ladder of the DNA structure, each side is really its own molecule. You learn that the place where the beads touch each other is really a link that holds one side of the ladder of the DNA to the other side. Therefore, if you know the sequence of nucleotide bases on one half of a portion of DNA, you can determine what the sequence of bases will be on the other half, because you know that adenine can only link with thymine, and cytosine only link with guanine. Now, it's interesting when I went out on the internet and looked at other models of DNA, and I want to show you a couple of those, just to give you a feel of how lots of people are out there building these. This particular one, it looks sort of like Legos here. Again, though, notice that in this case, the blue and the white are always connected together, and the gray and the yellow are always connected together. Another one that's my favorite is the baby's first DNA model. So yes, indeed, you can buy a little chew toy for your baby to chew on as they're teething. That's an example of DNA. So DNA is very, very important, and the structure of it holds the information that gives it the ability to produce life. So that is the summary, or that is the explanation of criterion number 1 of the 4 criterion that define life. And that criterion is that all life forms contain deoxyribonucleic acid, which is called DNA. Now let's go on to the second criterion. You need to write this down in your notes, and that is that all life forms have a method by which they extract energy or take energy out from the surroundings and convert it into energy that sustains them. If you need to pause the video so that you can write this down, do that now. So this second criterion tells us that all living organisms have to have some way that they eat. Now, not everything eats like we eat, but in a sense, they all have to eat by getting energy from their surroundings. Now, animals, humans, we eat food. But plants produce their own food, so they don't eat in the same way that we do. But they do still extract energy from the surroundings and convert it into energy that sustains them. So they are fulfilling this second criterion, which makes them alive. Now they produce their own food through a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, photo means light, and synthesis means to combine. So this particular word, the definition that you have learned, is that photosynthesis is the process by which green plants and some other organisms use the energy of sunlight and simple chemicals to produce their own food. Now, you're taking notes, and I want you to turn that notebook paper over because we're going to draw some diagrams of photosynthesis and metabolism. So the first thing I want you to do in the kind of upper half of your piece of paper is to draw this box and label it as photosynthesis. We're going to look and see what is required to go into the process of photosynthesis and what do we get out of that process. There are 3 things required for photosynthesis to occur. So draw 3 arrows that are going into the box here. The first one is sunlight. In order for plants to produce their own food through photosynthesis, they must receive some sunlight. They also need carbon dioxide, or CO2. And the third thing that plants need for photosynthesis is water, H2O. So those three things are required. When a plant has those things, it has some miraculous methods of turning those things into two things that it puts out. One of them is that it produces oxygen. The other is it produces glucose. Glucose is kind of like a type of sugar. Plants convert the glucose into energy in order to survive. So it is that glucose that is their food that provides allows them to survive. If they don't use all of that glucose for survival, any unused glucose is stored in the plant as starch. Once an organism has its food, either when we eat food or when a plant produces its food, it then converts that food to energy by a process called metabolism. Metabolism is the sum total of all the processes in an organism that convert energy and matter from outside sources and use that energy and matter to sustain the organism's life functions. So, still in your notes on the back page, underneath photosynthesis, move down just a little bit and draw another box called, and label it, metabolism. In order for plants or humans or animals to do the process of metabolism, it requires two things. So we've got two arrows going into the process of metabolism. The first thing that you need is food. This may be in the form of starch or other types of food for humans and animals. Also, metabolism requires oxygen. These two things go into a human body or plants or whatever, and the miraculous process of metabolism then produces three things. It produces energy. That energy is what we need to sustain life. Metabolism also produces carbon dioxide, CO2. And finally, it produces water, H2O. Most living things require oxygen to survive. You all know that. We all need to breathe oxygen. If we don't have oxygen, we die. One of the reasons that we need oxygen is because of this process of metabolism. We need that oxygen to convert our food into energy. There's other reasons we need it as well, but this is one of the reasons that we need to breathe oxygen. So you should have on the back of your notes something that looks like this. And we're going to look at how these processes of photosynthesis and metabolism work together. Remember that photosynthesis produces glucose. That is the output. And if the plant doesn't use all of that glucose for its own survival, that glucose can be stored as a starch. Well, that starch then can be used as food for metabolism, either food for the plant itself or food for humans and animals. Notice that photosynthesis also produces oxygen, and that oxygen is also required for metabolism. So the oxygen and glucose that's converted to starch that are put out by photosynthesis are the two requirements that are needed for metabolism to occur. Then notice the outputs of metabolism, carbon dioxide and water, are what are needed for the process of photosynthesis. So you can see here that all we need to do for a plant, all that is needed is sunlight, because that the things required for photosynthesis are the outputs of the metabolism. So a plant can do this entire process with just having sunlight added to it. It uses carbon dioxide and water to do the process of photosynthesis, which produces oxygen and glucose. That oxygen and starch is then used in metabolism to give it energy, carbon dioxide and water, and that carbon dioxide and water with the addition of sunlight allows it to do photosynthesis, and this cycle can just go on and on and on in a plant. This is where we did experiment 9.3, and you have probably seen this yourself in a terrarium, where you put a plant in there, just give it sunlight, and that whole process of metabolism and photosynthesis and metabolism and photosynthesis occurs again and again that allows the plant to sustain itself with just the addition of sunlight. Now, there's a question in the book that says, what about fertilizer? Well, fertilizer is not part of this process. Plants do not require fertilizer. But fertilizer sort of makes plants healthier. Think of it like vitamins. If you take supplementary vitamins, you don't have to have these supplements that you take, vitamin C or whatever. You don't have to have those in order to stay alive. But those vitamins, if you take them, can make you be healthier and resistant to sickness and things like that. It's sort of the same with fertilizer. Fertilizer is sort of vitamins for plants. Not absolutely necessary, but can make the plant be healthier. That's going to be the end of part 2. The last part we'll be doing experiment 9.2.